I had my hand on Carol's pot and I was trying to remember how to let go of it. Not the pot. I knew how to set a pot down. I mean the whole 40 acres of it, the fence lines and the creek and the shed, with the bad hinge I'd been meaning to fix for going on 6 years. I mean the place itself, the particular way the light came through the hickory canopy in early October and landed on the east field in pieces, the way the well water smelled faintly of iron and something older than iron. I was trying to remember how to let go of a place that had been mine, since before I understood what mine meant. Lottie was sitting beside the stump with her nose working the air, her ears forward, her grey muzzle pointed at the tree line across the east field. She was not growling. She was not scared. She was listening to something I hadn't heard yet. I looked up from the pot. The tree line sat there the way it always had, a wall of second-growth oak and tulip poplar about 200 yards out, the leaves gone amber and rust in the October dry. Nothing moved. The field was quiet in a way that I could not yet name, but that my body had already started to pay attention to. I want to back up, though, because none of that moment makes sense without the 3 years that came before it. If you'll stay with me a little while, I'll tell you what that field and that pot and that silence meant. I've told this story to exactly one other person before today, and even then I only told half of it, so I'll try to tell it right. Carol died in early September, 3 years before that October morning. She was 58 years old, which is not enough years, and she was gone in 6 weeks from the time they found it to the time I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had made for 2 out of habit, and had to pour half of it down the drain. A short illness is what people said. I understood why they said it. There is not a better way to say it that does not take longer than the conversation allows. She had kept the 40 acres with me for 26 years. We had not farmed it in any serious way. Just a large garden, some chickens for a while. A woodlot we kept thinned on the west side. I had spent 31 years as a rural mail carrier on a route about 12 miles from the property, and the place had been what I came home to. Carol was the one who knew every plant on it by name. She was the one who put the clay pot on the east stump every spring, filled with well water, because the deer came through that side of the field at dawn, and she liked to know they had a clean drink waiting. It was her ritual, not mine. I always thought it was a little sentimental. I told her that once, in the easy way you tell someone a thing when you are certain they will still be there next year to prove you wrong about it. She looked at me over her shoulder and said, the deer did not care what I called it. And she was right, the way she was right about most things that I had opinions on without sufficient information. After she died, I kept putting the pot out. I did not make a decision about it. I just did it, the way I kept making 2 cups of coffee for about 3 months before I started paying attention to what I was doing. The property taxes came due in the spring following her death, and then again the next spring. And I was on a fixed income from retirement with no second paycheck coming in and a tax bill on 40 acres that did not care what I had lost or what the land meant to me. I held on 1 year. I held on into the second year on savings that were not built for that kind of load. By 18 months after Carol was gone, I knew I was going to have to sell. Roy found out the way I told him, directly and without softening it much, because I did not know how to soften it without making it worse. He was 34 then, and he had grown up on that 40 acres the same as I had grown up on my father's place in Carter County, and he did not take it well. He said things that were true and some things that were unkind, and I said something back that I should not have said, and then we did not speak for 18 months. 18 months is a long time to not speak to your son. I know that now better than I knew it then, which is the way most of the important things in my life have worked. The sale closed in late September, and the new owner, a couple from Cincinnati who wanted the land for a weekend retreat, agreed to let me have one last day on the property before possession transferred at the end of the week. They were decent people, I want to say that, because I have thought unkind things about them in the dark, and none of those things were fair. I drove up on a Tuesday in early October, 4 hours north and east, up into the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, the road getting narrower and the trees getting closer as I got close to the county. I had Lottie in the passenger seat, with her head out the window until it got cold enough that she thought better of it, and curled up against my leg. She was 13 years old that October, which is a good long age for a border collie. Carol had named her when she was 8 weeks old, had picked her out of a litter from a farm 2 counties over, and brought her home in a box with a towel in it. She was grey around the eyes and slow on the stairs now, but once she got moving, she was still herself. I had a short list of things to do. I wanted to walk the fence line on the north and east sides, where the wire had been sagging for 2 seasons. I was not going to fix it, since it was not mine to fix anymore, but I wanted to see it. I wanted to take a few things from the shed. A hand plane of my father's, a post-hole digger I had borrowed from my neighbour Dwight Parsley years ago, and never returned, and never would now. I wanted to walk down to the creek one more time and stand on the flat limestone shelf where Carol and I used to sit in the evenings in the early years when Roy was small, and we would let him wade in the shallows while the light went gold on the water. That was the list. Walk the fence, get the tools, see the creek, say goodbye to a place in the honest way, which is by looking at it without flinching instead of looking somewhere else. I got there around 9 in the morning. The house was locked, and the key was no longer mine, which I had known would be the case, but still registered as a small physical fact when I tried the door out of 40 years of habit, and it did not give. I stood on the porch for a minute, and then I went around back where the shed was. I found the hand plane on the shelf where I had left it, wrapped in an oilcloth the way my father had taught me. I set it on the tailgate of the truck. I found the post-hole digger in the corner leaning against the south wall. I found a canvas bag Carol had used for seed packets, still hanging on the nail inside the door, and I stood there holding it for a little longer than I meant to. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I went around to the east side of the house where the well was, and I drew up a bucket of water, and I filled the clay pot. Carol had left the pot at the shed the previous fall. The last fall she was well enough to set it out. I had moved it inside the shed for the winter out of habit and never moved it back, and there it had sat for 3 years on the same shelf with the hand plane. I carried it out to the east stump and I set it down full of water. I do not know exactly why I did it. The deer would still come through after I was gone. Maybe that was it. Maybe I just needed one more morning where the pot was where it belonged. If you have ever done a thing that you could not explain while you were doing it and only understood years later, you know what I mean. If you have not, I hope you do someday, because those are the things that turn out to matter. I walked the north fence line first. The wire was sagging in 3 places on the northeast corner where the old cedar post had rotted through at the ground. I stood there and looked at it for a while and felt the familiar pull toward fixing it. And then I reminded myself that I had neither the wire staples nor the authority, and I kept walking. The morning was cool and dry, the kind of October day that feels like an apology for summer. The sky a clean pale blue with no clouds in it. Lottie came with me along the fence. She moved slower than she used to, but she was thorough about it. Nose to the ground, checking everything the way she always had. She had been a working dog her whole life in her own estimation, even though the only work we ever gave her was being Carol's shadow and keeping the field clear of woodchucks, which she took seriously. By 10:30, I was down at the creek. I stood on the flat limestone shelf and I listened to the water running over the gravel in the shallows. The shelf was exactly the same, The sycamore on the far bank had grown another 15 years around its trunk since the last time I had sat there with Carol and Roy, and it was enormous now, the bark going white and peeling in plates. I thought about Roy for a minute, the age he had been when he used to wade in that water, maybe 6 or 7, the way he used to holler when the cold hit his ankles. I did not sit down. I had thought I would, but when I got there, I could not make myself do it. I stood for a few minutes and then I walked back up the bank toward the east field. It was around 11 when I noticed the creek had gone quiet. I want to be careful how I say this, because I spent a month trying to explain it to myself as something ordinary, and I want you to understand that I tried in good faith. The creek itself was still running. I could hear it behind me. What had gone quiet was everything around it. The wood thrushes that had been working the understory along the bank all morning, the squirrels that had been noisy in the canopy, a pair of crows that had been moving along the creek corridor since I arrived. They were all gone. Not called away gradually, the way they go when weather changes. Gone, the way things go when something large and not familiar is nearby. I turned around and looked at the tree line across the east field. 200 yards. The leaves were bright and still. Nothing moved. I have been a man who walked alone in rural country for 31 years of early morning mail routes through all kinds of weather and terrain, and I know what the woods sound like when they go quiet around a bear. This was not that. A bear moves through and the quiet follows it and then fills back in behind it in a minute or two. This quiet held. I stood there at the edge of the creek bank with Lottie beside me, and I did the first reasonable thing, which was to tell myself I was imagining the difference. I had been up since 4:30 in the morning and had driven 4 hours and was carrying more weight than a man should carry on a Tuesday in October, and I told myself that the birds had simply moved off, and I had not registered the transition the way I usually would. That explanation lasted about 3 minutes. Then Lottie sat down. Not lay down the way she does when she is tired. Sat up, ears forward, the way she does when she is paying attention to something in a direction she has decided is worth keeping track of. Her nose was working, slow and steady. Her tail was still. She was not scared. I want to be clear about that. She was not scared. If she had been scared, I would have walked back to the truck without a second thought, because Lottie's judgment about things in the natural world was better than mine, and I knew it. She was interested. I walked down to the creek bottom, where the bank flattened out into a muddy shelf maybe 10 feet wide before the water started. I did not have a plan. I think I was just doing what I always do when something does not add up, which is to look closer at the actual physical evidence and see what it tells me. What it told me was a track. One track in the mud at the edge of the water, about 4 inches back from where the current lapped the bank. I stood over it for a long minute before I crouched down and looked at it at eye level. It was a footprint. Flat-footed, 5 toes, the shape and proportions of a human foot, except that it was 17 inches long. I measured it with my boot, which is a size 11, and then I measured it again with my hand, knuckle to fingertip twice and some more. 17 inches was right, maybe a touch more. The depth of the impression was deep, the way you get from a great deal of weight on soft ground. The edges were fresh, the mud still slightly glossy where it had been pressed. I went through 3 explanations across the next 10 minutes, crouched there in the creek mud with Lottie standing beside me. A large man wearing some kind of mold or prosthetic. I rejected this because we were on land that had been mine since before Roy was born, and the nearest road was half a mile through dense timber, and you do not carry staging equipment for a hoax half a mile through timber on a weekday. Depth perception playing tricks in the October light which I rejected because I put my hand in the track. And it was real mud and it was real depth. A drift log or debris impression. I looked around for the log or the debris and there was none. And a log does not leave a five-toed impression with a distinct arch and heel. I stood up. I looked at the tree line. Lottie looked at me. "All right," I said out loud, to nobody. The sound of my own voice in that quiet was strange. I went back up the bank and I walked the east fence line, which was what I had planned to do. I wanted to be a man who was still doing the thing he had planned to do, because that felt like something I could hold on to. The fence line ran north along the edge of the east field, 100 yards from the tree line at its closest point, and I walked it slowly, and I checked each post as I went, and I did not look at the tree line more than 3 or 4 times. Lottie walked beside me. Every 20 yards or so she would stop and face the woods and stand still for a moment and then continue on. Not alarmed, not retreating, just checking. The second thing I noticed was around 1 in the afternoon. I had come back around past the east stump and I stopped short because something was different about it. I had left the clay pot full of water, a flat, calm surface. Now the water was moving, very slightly, the way water moves when it has just been disturbed. And beside the stump on the ground, there was a small pile of acorns and hickory nuts, maybe 24 of them, arranged in a rough oval in the flattened grass. Not scattered the way they fall, arranged. I looked at them for a long time. I am not a man who reaches easily for explanations I cannot put my hands on, but I was running out of the other kind. A squirrel does not arrange. A deer does not carry. A person would have had to walk out of the tree line and back in the time I was on the north fence, which was not impossible but made no sense that I could name. I left the nuts where they were. I went back to the shed and I ate the sandwich I had brought, sitting on the truck tailgate, and I gave Lottie half of it, which she deserved, and I drank some water, and I watched the east field. The afternoon light was beginning to go that long angle way it goes in October in the foothills, everything going amber, the shadows of the trees stretching out toward me across the field. It was beautiful in the way that October days in that country are beautiful, which is a little too much, like something that is trying to make up for something else. I was sitting on the tailgate when I saw the movement. It was at the woodlot corner, where the east field met the north tree line at the fence corner. A dark shape, large, moving deliberately through the timber about 30 yards in from the field edge. It was not a deer's movement. A deer moves in segments, head dropping and lifting, legs working separately from the body. This was a single shape moving at shoulder height through the trees, which meant it was moving upright and moving quietly for the size of it, which I estimated at the time as somewhere well over 6 feet and wide across the shoulders, in a way that was not the width of a man. It was there for maybe 4 seconds, and then it was behind a stand of tulip poplars and gone. I did not move from the tailgate for a full minute. I want to be honest about that. I did not panic. I also did not move. Lottie was at my feet, and she had lifted her head and watched the same corner of the woodlot, and she put her head back down on her paws when the shape was gone. She was not distressed. She was, if I had to say it, patient. Like she had been waiting for me to see what she had already known was there. I went inside for a while after that. I mean, I got into the truck cab and sat there. I did not drive away. I thought about it. I sat there for 20 minutes and I thought about it. And then I got out and walked back to the east stump because I could not make myself leave the pot out there alone in whatever was happening. The pot was still there. The nuts were still there. I stood at the stump and I watched the tree line, and the tree line watched me back. Then I walked toward it. I have asked myself many times since that afternoon what made me do that, and the best answer I have is this. Lottie went first. She walked off toward the east field at her slow, old dog pace, head up, tail moving, not cautious in the way she gets when she is uncertain. And I followed her because I had trusted her judgment for 13 years, and I was not going to stop now. We walked 200 yards across the east field in the late afternoon light. The shadows were long now, reaching past the stump and all the way to the shed behind us. The temperature had dropped maybe 10 degrees since noon, and I could feel it at my ears and the back of my neck. We stopped at the field edge, where the grass gave out and the fallen leaves began. The timber was open enough that I could see maybe 50 yards in before it thickened, and at about 40 yards in, standing still and facing me, was the largest thing I have ever seen in any forest in 61 years of being alive. I cannot tell you exactly what it looked like in terms of the details of its face, because the light was behind it and coming in, broken through the timber, and also because I think my mind was working slowly. The way it does when it receives information, it does not have a category 4. What I can tell you is this. It was upright. It was covered in dark brown fur, the kind of brown that goes almost black in shadow. It was somewhere between 8 and 9 feet in height, and it was broad across the chest and shoulders in a proportion that was nothing like any bear I had ever seen, and I have seen black bears close enough to read their moods. Its arms were long. Its posture was not aggressive. It was standing with its weight settled, the way a person stands when they have been waiting somewhere for a while and have made their peace with waiting. Lottie sat down at my feet. We looked at each other, this thing and I, across 40 yards of October woodland and 3 years of something I had been carrying alone in the particular way that men of a certain kind and a certain training carry things. It did not make a sound. I did not make a sound. The wind came through the canopy above us and moved the amber leaves, and that was all. I do not know how long we stood like that. My guess is 2 or 3 minutes, but I would not testify to that under oath. Time was moving differently than it usually does. Then it turned, not away but to the side, moving slowly, and I watched it go to the tree line edge, to the very boundary between the woods and the east field, and it stopped there and it crouched, or it bent, and I could not see what it was doing because the angle was wrong. Then it stood again, and it moved back into the timber, and it was gone. I stood there for another minute. Then I walked to where it had stopped. The clay pot was on the stump where I had left it. I don't know how I had not noticed the pot from where I was standing, but I had been looking at the creature and not at the stump, and the stump was at the field edge 20 yards south of where I had been. The pot was full. Not the level I had left it at before, which had dropped an inch or two through the afternoon, but full to the rim, the water still slightly moving. And beside the pot, placed with a care that I cannot describe without it sounding like I am trying to make it sound like more than it was, which I am not, was a sheaf of wildflowers. Late asters, purple and pale, and goldenrod, going to seed at the top, but still yellow along the stalk. The kind of wildflowers Carol had grown along the east fence every summer we were on that property. She had called them her fall garden, said they were the easiest kind because they did not ask for anything. She had brought bunches of them inside every year from late August through the first hard frost, put them in a jam jar on the kitchen table. I have thought about this part many times since that October. I am not a person who reaches for explanations he cannot verify. I am also not a person who calls himself a fool for what his own eyes and his own hands and his own 13-year-old dog confirmed in front of him in good light on a clear afternoon. The flowers were real. The water in the pot was real. The print in the creek mud was real, and I had measured it twice. Whatever had been watching that property long enough to know what Carol put on that stump, long enough to know what grew along that east fence, and what those flowers meant to the woman who put them there, had filled her pot and laid her flowers down beside it. On the last afternoon, the land would belong to anyone who remembered her name. That was when something broke loose in my chest that had been locked up for 3 years. I did not cry, exactly. I stood there with my hand on the rim of Carol's pot, and I made a sound I had never heard myself make before, low and short, and then I was quiet, and the field was quiet, and Lottie was against my leg. I stood there until the light was nearly gone. Then I picked up the sheaf of wildflowers carefully, holding them the way Carol had always held a bundle from the fence, stems gathered, heads up, and I carried them and the pot to the truck. I set the pot in the bed with the hand plane and the post-hole digger, wrapped in the same oilcloth. I laid the flowers across the top of it. I sat in the truck for a while before I started it. The property was dark now, except for the pale light coming off the east field where the sky was still going purple. I could not see the tree line anymore. I thought about whether I should feel frightened by what I had seen, and I realized I did not, and that this was information about what it had been, though I could not have explained the logic of that to you then, and I am not sure I can now. Lottie put her head in my lap. I picked up my phone off the seat. The service up there is poor, and it took a minute to get a signal, but I got one. I called Roy. It rang 4 times, and I thought he would not answer, and then he did. Dad. That was all he said at first, just that one word, and the way he said it told me he had been waiting for it to be me for a long time. Roy. I had a whole thing I had thought I was going to say if I ever called him, a proper thing, organized. What came out was, I'm still up at the place. I wanted to, and then I stopped because I couldn't finish it the way I'd planned. He waited. I shouldn't have said what I said, I told him, about the property, about you not understanding what it cost to hold on to it. That wasn't right. There was a pause that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, I shouldn't have said what I said either, Dad, any of it. We were quiet for a moment, which was all right. You coming home tomorrow? He asked. Yeah, I said. 4 hours back. Drive careful, he said. It's supposed to frost tonight. That was almost all of it. Nothing resolved and packaged. Nothing said that covered the 18 months we had lost, or the property, or his mother, or any of the rest of it. Just that. Drive careful. It's supposed to frost tonight. But I had called, which was the thing I had not been able to do for 1.5 years, and he had answered, which was the thing I had not known he would do, and we had both said the word that needed saying, even if we said it small and plain, and without ceremony. I started the truck, and I drove out the gravel lane, and I did not look back, not because I was trying to be strong about it, but because the headlights were aimed ahead, and that is where I was going. The frost Roy had mentioned came in that night, and by morning, the new owner had land with a hard frost on it and a clay pot no longer on the stump. Weeks passed, the way weeks do when you are trying to live in one place instead of 2, which is what grief does to you, splits you between where you are and where you cannot go back to. I called Roy on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after I came home, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing much, his work, a roof repair he was doing, whether the winter was going to be hard. It was the longest we had talked in 2 years. I did not tell him about the creek bottom or the track or what I had seen at the tree line. I was not ready to, and I am not sure ready is even the right word. Some things are not secret because we are hiding them. They are private because they belong to a place inside us that does not yet have a door that opens outward. I put the clay pot on the kitchen windowsill when I got home. I put the dried wildflowers in it, the ones that had been laid by the stump because they had dried cleanly on the drive down, and they were still recognizably themselves, aster and goldenrod, the ones Carol had called her fall garden. I look at it every morning. I am not sentimental about it, or I try not to be, which is probably as honest as I can get. Lottie sleeps at my feet most evenings now. She is slower than she was in October, and some mornings she does not want to get off her bed right away, and I let her take her time. She is 13 years old, and she has earned every slow morning she wants. Carol would have made a great fuss about it and given her a piece of toast, and I try to remember to do that too, though I am not as good at the gestures as Carol was. I don't know what I saw in those woods. I want to be clear about that because clarity is the thing I have always tried to offer when I tell a story, and I am offering it now. I have the track measurements in my head, and they are 17 inches, and I trust them because I measured twice. I have the image of that shape in the timber, 8 or 9 feet and upright and patient in its posture. And I trust that because I saw it in reasonable light from a distance, I can name. I have the flowers and the water in the pot. And I trust those because I held them in my hands. What I do not have is an explanation that fits into any category I was given for understanding the world, and I have stopped reaching for one. I am 61 years old, and I have reached for explanations my whole life, and some of them have served me well, and some of them have served me poorly, and this one I am content to leave unreached for. What I know is that something had been watching that 40 acres for longer than I understood. Something had learned what was placed on that stump every spring, and why. Something knew that the woman who placed it there was gone, and that the man who kept placing it out of habit was on the last day he would have to do it, and that he needed something he could not have named if you had asked him that morning what he was looking for. I believe, for whatever my belief is worth, that it was paying attention the way something pays attention when it has been in one place long enough to know it well. The way the land itself seems to pay attention some mornings, when the light is right and the air is still and you are small enough inside it that you forget to be only yourself. The 40 acres is not mine anymore, the deed says so, and I have made my peace with that, or I am making my peace with it, which is the more honest version of the same sentence. What I carried off that land on a Tuesday in October, in the bed of my truck, wrapped in oilcloth and laid across with wildflowers, is not something that needed me to own the land to keep it. That took me a while to understand, but I got there. Roy is coming for Christmas. He called to tell me himself, which was the version I had stopped letting myself hope for, and then I went ahead and hoped for it anyway, and it arrived. We will have 31 days until Christmas when he calls, which is long enough to do the things that need doing before he gets here. The spare room window that sticks, the porch light that has needed a new bulb since August. I have been doing the things that need doing. That is new, or it is new again, which is close enough. Some mornings when the light comes in a certain way and hits that pot on the windowsill, I think about what is still out there in those eastern foothills, going about its life in whatever way it goes about its life, unhurried and older than my understanding of it, watching the fields change season by season, the way the fields have always changed. I think about what it must have taken to know that one particular stump and one particular pot and one particular kind of flower meant something to someone who was gone, and to do the thing it did anyway. Lottie is at my feet, breathing slow and even in her sleep. The pot is on the sill where it belongs. That is enough to know.